artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world.
I'm going to start reading your bio, Mikala, and then we can get into your talk shortly. So welcome, everyone. Mikala Dwyer was with us quite a bit back in the early pandemic time, so we got to know Mikala and her work quite deeply over all these different classes that we got to end up studying in. So Mikala's bios reads, using all of her signature materials, Mikala Dwyer creates compounds that take the viewer across boundaries of time, space, and geography. Full of uncertainties and contradictions, Dwyer's complex installations never lend themselves to definite interpretations. Her work has been described as profoundly sociable. She asks viewers to come in, participate, and find their own meanings. Dwyer's installations are like playgrounds for an alien species or for some fantastical mutations of the human race. They're fun and funny, if in an unnatural and unearthly way. Her cubby house architecture is fabricated from bits and pieces of urban humdrum, abducted from their commonplace duties and let loose in her immersive installations. She sets up open-ended conversations that draw on our attention to the unseen, to invisible materials such as helium or the voids between her forms, but also to hidden histories in our own highly personal relationships with magic, memory, sexuality, and ritual. While playful and exuberant on their surfaces, her works almost always have something darker beneath the surface. With a practice spanning 40 years, Mikala Dwyer has pushed the limits of installation, sculpture, and performance. She has had solo shows at major institutions such as the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, AGNSW Sydney, and the Museum of New Zealand. Te Papa Toragawa. She has also participated in the Istanbul, Sydney, and Adelaide biennials. She was included in Face Up Contemporary Art from Australia at Hamburg and in 2003, and several other very amazing exhibitions.
That's a very long bio. Sorry.
Some good big points to hit at the end. With no further ado, Mikala, thank you for coming to us today and sharing your work with us.
Thank you so much, Amber, and it's really lovely to be back. It's very special. I've been absent for a while. I've been sort of swept up in other things, but it's very nice to be back in the school. Holds a dear place in my heart. And I'd just like to acknowledge I'm coming from the Gadigal people's land, part of the Eora Nations, and pay my respects to the elders, past and present and emerging. And I'm just going to bombard you with a whole lot of images, which because I'm old, I have done too much work and I never know how to kill off enough of my darlings and put them into any sensible order. Yeah, like a lot of the work, might look a bit sort of disparate and different from each other, but I guess that's because a lot of the work, it starts from all sorts of personal kind of stories and, things and thinking and ideas, but it's also always in response to a site. So, like the work is sort of very much part and parcel of wherever it fits in. So just to start this bombardment of images I'm putting on you, I'll start with this one. It's a very old work that is an IOU, which is a promissory note. It's like it's like an early type of credit card, I guess, or something that would a promise to stand in for something that you might exchange later. So, and this one is blown up into big physical 3-dimensional form in a mirror stainless finish, so that it's just gone in here and it's a bit dirty, but when it's, all shiny, it disappears. So it's kind of a very big kind of public sculpture, but it disappears, or it picks up everything around it. So it's like a poem or a debt to wherever it is. And it's those 3 letters, an I and a U, and then the O is a sort of portal between the I and the U. And it's like the I becomes a little unstable in terms of whose I is it? Is it my I? Am I the I, or are you the I, the viewer? And then the O becomes like this, like that. The center of the O is the proportions of a doorway. So it's like a portal between you and I. And the U is also kind of unstable, even though they're these big blocky steel letters. So as a preamble to everything else, it's a kind of a promise that never quite gets delivered. It's really there, but it's also kind of not there. And this was a work in a laneway in Sydney that's called Underwood Street. And when I was asked to do this work, it's quite a nondescript lane in Sydney, and Sydney often gets jealous of Melbourne because Melbourne has a real laneway culture. Their laneways are really activated with bars and cafes and heaps of graffiti, and Melbourne's very proud of their laneways because they don't have the same glamorous geography that Sydney has. Beautiful beaches and coast and lots of money. So anyway, this was a project trying to enliven the Sydney laneways, and I got given this one, Underwood Street, which just made me think of under Milkwood for some reason. Like the word I split from Underwood to under Milkwood, and I had a sound 2 speakers up in the pillars which were playing the radio play read by Richard Burton. I'm sure you've all heard it, the fantastic Dylan Thomas story Under Milkwood, which is kind of like this imaginary town. So in a sense, I was trying to create this, crack open the space and create this alternate universe which celebrated or at least dignified smokers, because this was at a time, I guess, when smoking had been outlawed, and so people in the offices around here would just come and sit in the gutters and stand outside and smoke. And so I wanted to give them a space where they could sit and smoke with a bit of dignity and listen to this story under Milkwood. So it was kind of using working with what's there, but then trying to create another kind of reality. Now, where is it not? Oh yeah. And so over time, the cigarette butts piled up, but it became really a popular place. People would gather there. And so these are sort of various sites around Sydney, and this is another work in Redfern in Sydney. And this was, I was asked to do this it was like a heritage listed chimney. So, which weren't allowed to do any damage in any way. So we came up with this work where we inserted this flagpole into the top of the chimney with a windsock, which was sort of trying to make visible the wind, or, to get people to look up and just be conscious of this force of nature. It's so often forgotten in the middle of the city. And then another, this is, so obviously I actually come from Sydney, but I live in Melbourne now, which is another city a long way away from Sydney. But when I grew up in this area that was near this place called Cockatoo Island, that was probably one of a colonial prison, like one of the most brutal prison camps in Australian history, where convicts were sent from Ireland and England, and like a kind of a to carve and to quarry the sandstone there. And so this was a Sydney Biennale 2010 or 2000, yeah. And in this space, because it's like now it's sort of like a cultural precinct, but it's gone from being a horrific kind of prison to a then it became a ship building place, and a submarine building place, like a sort of a like a bunch of factories to build ships and military kind of things. And I sort of grew up near this island, spent a bit of time. I had a friend whose father was a caretaker on the island, so it has a had a lot of connection to this site and to the sandstone, because my parents built a house out of this material, or repaired a house, a broken down old sandstone cottage. So that stone comes from my parents' house, what was left over. But I made this kind of sonic circle sculpture thing that was like a seance. And it's called the additions and subtractions, and it was designed to kind of summon the spirits of the island through a kind of body memory of hammering. So the recording was all these layers and layers of hammering, sounds of hammering the stone, and some of it was recorded from a stone's point of view, so microphones placed inside the stone while I'm carving it, and just layering up this very dense sound in an attempt to kind of create a space where perhaps the ghosts of the island, because it's apparently, it's reported that it is one of the most haunted sites in Sydney, is Cockatoo Island. There's a lot of trauma there, I guess, that's always imprinted in the psyche of a space. And so this was a way for me to sort of create a space where they might be able to come back and speak or present themselves. So it was like, there was smoke machines and all the trappings of good old seances. So which led to this work. I know they look very different, but this work came out of thinking about prisons and how we imagine and build prisons, and how all architectures at some point are actually a neural architecture. They're an idea and a plan and a drawing maybe, and then they get kind of consolidated and solidified, and over time they become rigid and institutionalizing. And so I was thinking about this prison on Cockatoo Island and its histories, and thinking, well, if we can imagine a prison, can we unimagine a prison? Can we reimagine prisons? Can we start to go back to sort of really early childhood types of building where it's much less mediated and more direct? Can we take some of the tropes of things like a square, and in this instance, by adding, one square in this big canopy, all it is one square meter added to another square, and continually until it ends up actually being something really unruly and organic. And then these like gallows that actually have birdhouses on them, and these lamps, which are kind of like light lamps, but also like bodies somehow hanging, and stockings, other sort of support structures that hold this architecture up, and the tension, and so there's this sense of strength in those stockings, but their flexibility and their fragility at the same time, but they hold up this whole kind of architecture. So and then it's full of these like totems of birds and cats, and like an idea of escape, but also containment, but looseness and shelter, and play. So it's kind of the antithesis, or it's, you know, it's a trying to loosen up a thinking around prisons or something, wondering if you can, you know, how do we unimagine these kind of rigid architectures? And then when I originally did it, there was this other component of it in another room, which was this helium balloon zero floating sculpture that was free. So there was one room that was about the square cloud compound was the title of the other work. And this one is called the Silverings, which was free. The first iteration anyway was free to roam around in the space like an escapee. And it just had a mind of its own. And, you know, you could come in and it would be hovering over the office or high up in the ceiling, and that's another version. So since then I've done quite a few versions, and now they seem to all be coming, you know, attached to the ground. No one will let them loose in their museums because they're going to bump into the paintings, or, you know, they'll cause havoc, or so they've gone to this funny thing of trying to escape. You know, they're all trying to fly away, but they're all weighted down now. So it's interesting, their trajectory. And so still on the theme of prisons, this is another work that I was invited to the Sterischer Herbst Festival in Graz in Austria. And this was a site visit to this town. Oh, and it's 2 a.m. and I forgot the name of my memory is not working very well. So it's a town in the an alpine village up in the Alps, just near Graz. And this town was a really important mining town and a university town, a very powerful kind of university town that around mining, and it went into kind of bankruptcy, and now there's nothing there. They don't have a supermarket or a bank. The bank, they have a teller that, you know, an ATM that comes in on a truck once a week or something. And because all their fortunes kind of left them when this was a smelting and a, you know, iron ore processing plant. And this is a monument to the very last piece of slag or you know, the absolute end result of a smelting process with iron ore. There's this stuff, and this is like the very last one. It's like a kind of human-made meteorite, and it's huge, and it's solid iron. It was the most kind of extraordinary object, and it was like this irreducible waste left over from that period, industrial period. And there's this funny monument. Anyway, the town, to resurrect its kind of economy, was offered a opportunity to host a detention centre that is beautifully designed, and won all these awards for its beautiful design. But it's actually, you know, it's one of those really end of the road detention centres when asylum seekers had, you know, exhausted every possibility and end up coming here and then back to whichever port they came into the country on, and then sent back to wherever they came from. So, and we were invited to come and visit this place because there was no one there. There was only a few people there because it had been closed down, or there were issues with it. The company that was running it was, you know, there was some dodgy things happened, and so anyway, there was only a few people. This was just before all the stuff was happening in Syria, and there was like tsunamis of people about to just pour over the borders. But when I was doing the site visit, there was no one there, and just like maybe 6 or 7 people in there. So no one really wanted to touch this site as artists because, you know, it was very complex. But, you know, for some reason I said I wanted to, and I wanted to get messages from the asylum seekers inside to outside through like their bureaucracy, through they have, Caritas charity looking after them. It would have been fully vetted, but they had no internet. They're not allowed to use the internet or anything, not allowed to have any messages coming out. So I designed this letterbox that was going to go. I actually got permission to do this, and they were going to put a letterbox inside the prison, and then the letters that the asylum seekers could put in there, and I could then, they'd get sort of vetted, but then I could put them on this huge, this big LED. But so I went back to Australia and then was going to come back and do all this, and they had bought this beautiful LED, very expensive thing to put on this monument. But in the meantime, the whole, trauma and terrible sort of exodus of humans from Syria came through, and suddenly, they closed the centre down. That's right. Sorry, this is a while ago. I'm trying to remember, but so there was no one in there when I got back, and so there were no messages to kind of bring out. And so I had this sign with nothing to say on it, and I thought, I don't know how to deal with this, But in the end, I just thought, this is a total disaster. I've got no words to put up on this. But then I started doing German classes with and ended up meeting all these Syrian refugees in the German class, and got to know a few of them, and we started talking, and then they would come down and to the museum where I was working, and I had these big colour banner things, and we'd just start talking about colour. And because the people in this village were very threatened and worried about what I was going to do in this town. But so the colour thing was a really simple way to kind of not freak everyone out, but to get their stories out somehow. So, and this is in Kurdish, which Kurds can't speak the language in their own country. They get killed, or anywhere really. Like, it's very hard to speak this language safely anywhere. But we had this just these very simple phrases that actually said a great deal in colour. That's the boys. And so it was this strange event where this is all the locals came out, and these are the old iron ore smelting works, factory workers. These are kind of circle works, and this was in Ireland. It was called Pantocalypso, and it was thinking about the value of gold and how gold is this material that's alien, that comes from another, it comes from, it's extraterrestrial, and then it sort of lands into the earth. So I was thinking of it as trying to create a kind of reverse alchemy where, sort of thinking about sending gold back. And this was after, the whole financial crisis in Ireland and the Celtic Tiger, and thinking about the value of gold. And this is a sort of graph. But I will, and then this work kind of comes out of that too, which is another kind of reverse alchemy with a community, a group of ballet dancers that I've commissioned to work with me on this. It's a communal shitting kind of performance where we're turning this base material back into gold. And it was surprising how people would come through the exhibition, just hang around. It became normalized very quickly and quite a comfortable environment for people to be in, even though it's sort of live work. And I think it was more surprising for people was the communal act of it rather than the actual thing of taking a dump in public. Oh, this is a little video of this was another part of it, that this is a video that got left after. just fast track it on a bit. And then we had the character walking around who was like he was sort of like the carer or the controller or the foreman, you know, inspecting everybody's production, or you know, could be like a parent or yeah, or a boss. I'll rush through that one because I think it's kind of a very complicated work to probably unpack in a short amount of time. So I'll just go through some of these kind of, I think a lot of work is now kind of looking at symbols and trying to understand what makes up a symbol, and, you know, how symmetry and why symmetry has such kind of a dominance in, you know, making up symbols and things. And these are more circle works, which have really been with me for a long, long time. I do them, they're like a kind of diary of wherever I am and whoever I'm with for different periods of time. And this one came out after, this is quite a collaborative one with friends contributing certain works into this circle. And yes, so they kind of allowed me a way of making work that was quite freeing in terms of thinking. So I could, you know, these sort of half-baked sculptural thoughts or ideas could then become animated into kind of an argument or a conversation with each other in these situations where I could really experiment with different forms and materials. But because of the tight geometry of a circle, it would sort of hold it in a sort of community or a conversation. And they sort of become performative in that, you know, people, you know, whether they choose to cross a threshold into the interior of the circle or choose to walk the perimeter externally, they both become quite charged spaces. And so they became quite naturally performative spaces. There's still, you know, there's a work up at the moment in Sydney at the art gallery that people ask me if they can perform in them, and it's great. This was a friend of mine performing in this one. Her name's Annie Mokoto. She's has a dance background and wonderful artist. So she's sort of collaborating with the objects and the sculptures. And then I guess I work as in a university and an art school teaching, and I think that always creeps into the practice quite a bit. And this was at the time, it was an anniversary, 100-year anniversary of the Bauhaus. And so I did this project with a friend, Justine Williams, and we did a week-long workshop with the students with the Bauhaus, but we were looking more at the sort of mystical side of the Bauhaus, less the design, architecture, good products, and the rational side, and more the sort of oogie boogie side of, you know, Johann Ittens and Lothar Schreier and a whole bunch of them. And this is Claire that was, you know, you're familiar with, Claire giving a lecture to the students. And so we did this kind of crazy week-long workshop where we'd bring in all these people to do talks while the students were making their lanterns, and we were reenacting a lantern parade from the Bauhaus. And we'd do these Johann Ittens breathing exercises in the morning. They're quite absurd, some of the lectures, and we didn't realize we'd sort of started it, you know, with all the oogie boogie mystics, and then we ended up with a really formal academic lecture right at the end. And I didn't realize that a lot of the students didn't even know what the Bauhaus was, so they got this really strange introduction to the Bauhaus, which was quite nice. This is Mark Shorter, who's a teacher at another art school in Melbourne, making a lantern out of hot glue. And this is Justine Williams doing a performance. And this is we were doing these Mazdaznan breathing exercises. This is a Iranian student of mine, because the Mazdaznan breathing technique is a Zoroastrian kind of came out of that religion, I think. And so we do this every morning. So, you know, pulled everyone back into their bodies to begin the day workshop. And then these lanterns they made, which were amazing, got marched down the main city street of Melbourne, and then ended up in the museum where the exhibition that Justine and I worked together on. So the first room you came into was like it was the really nice heart and soul of the exhibition was all the students. And then in the next room was Justine and my collaboration with a thistle garden after Paul Klee, and the coffins of Lothar Schreier. We did a version of those and performances. And then something completely different in another school, but far away in Japan, and an abandoned school in Ichihara is where they have a problem where the schools are now being closed because there aren't enough students. So I was invited to do something in this old science room. So I worked on site building these sculptures that are kind of like crazy, like scientific glassware gone berserk. And then some more public art that's not so public. Like this was a work which is designed to hardly be seen, even though it's public work. It was it was intended that it would only be seen in passing, like an apparition out of the corner of your eye in a park in Melbourne. And it was sort of advertised through a kind of gossip chain through Mandarin speaking students around that area who mainly sort of live in that area. I organised a kind of group of them to start up a WeChat message thing where they kind of started up a rumor about these spirit animals, and then that possum ended up becoming a koala in another university during lockdown. Nobody saw it either. These are these very invisible artworks that only some people saw it, maybe because no one was at this university while this was up because it was locked down. But it quietly kind of inhabited this space. It's quite amazing. I'll just show you this because the baby koala is so beautiful. And these are animations. They're not actual real animals. They're built up from geometry, actually. I'm building up a sort of collection of these animated creatures to create a supernatural zoo that started from working in the Mark Dion class with what's one of the gone blank on I'm just thinking of her Insta name is Magenta. I can't remember.
Oh, Christine.
Yeah, Christine, thank you. So Christine and I did a proposal together in the Mark Dion class that sort of has really stayed with me, and which is really nice. I think a lot of the works done during stuff that was developed during the TAS classes has really gone on to become things, and friendships out of those are still in touch, and it's nice. Like Yeah, so Christine and I had been thinking about a supernatural zoo, which I sort of am still working in my head. Just need to get Christine over somewhere to do it in, well, it doesn't need to be in real space, I guess. And then this is another lockdown baby, which was, I never saw this exhibition either. I didn't get to install it, which is hard because I love that part of it. And so these are kind of building blocks and bird paintings and this kind of nest in the middle. So everything is, and these pajamas, which were intended for the gallery people to wear for the opening, but just ended up on the racks because there was no opening. There was, yes, these are more magpies. This, yeah, these are, I call these the nurses. They come out of another show, but, and then there's another pigeon also built out of geometry. So there's no actual pigeons or no actual birds in that show, even though it's all about birds. And it just came out of lockdown of just being obsessed with the pigeons on my balcony and them being only visitors really during, you know, long time of Melbourne lockdown. You'll be able to see this, how it and this is, these are, I think of these as like nest eggs, like gold bars or gold, they're ceramic gold bricks. But they're like, to me, they're kind of like bird eggs, the wrong shape. But, and then another, from that work came more bird work. And this was a work in this space that also was in lockdown. So I only got to kind of rush in and install it and then rush out. But I was quite grateful because I was really struggling with this installation. It's an audio work. And but it, you know, because it wasn't open to the public, I could sneak in there and play with it for a long period of time until I could get it to, it was a really difficult work to do for some reason, but I'll play the sound. I don't know if you can hear it.
You might have to unscreen share and re-enter clicking the optimize for.
Oh, you can't hear it. Oh, that's a shame. Oh, don't worry. It's just, it's like a mix of bird sounds, but it also includes, it's quite distorted and abstracted, but also a sound of Carol Spinney, who was Big Bird. Sorry, anyway, so it was mainly an audio installation. So this sound, each speaker had a different bird. One was Carol Spinney, Big Bird, and the others was a magpie, bellbird, and a oh bird. This was also out of, came out of a TAS class. We started looking at the extinction of the bird. So this was called Ode to the Oh. And then these are just the last few works. Just this is trying to get things on tracks from my studio. Big things, big empty sculptures that just, so yeah, a lot of the work also is like always this void is really important to me in trying to kind of wrangle. And then a kids space in a museum in regional Australia, trying to kind of give them a space to, you know, like a kind of like a Mardi Gras space for kids to sort of dress up in, play dress ups in. And it was like onto the street. So it could be like they could do plays and things like that. And then something completely different again, paintings, just small paintings. Not something I do very often, but I find them really relaxing. And this is a new gallery I just started showing with. So I was just trying to do something that challenged myself. Probably no one would pick up on this, but for me, this was quite a radical departure to do something like sort of really just simple and restrained and just paintings and sculptures. Because normally I do like quite big, installations, and I just want to try stretch myself in a different way. And this is a work recent now. This is on now. It's called Penelope and the Seahorse. And again, it's a reference to the site. It's in a beautiful museum in Sydney that's a mix of archaeology, natural history, contemporary art, and other things. And Penelope is this woman that is, she's in her late 80s, and she's a kind of patron. The gallery is called after her, Penelope, and she's Penelope Seidler. And so I wanted to acknowledge her as part of the site, and then also this idea of a seahorse, because I was looking into this seahorse that was becoming extinct in Sydney, and then also the idea that the seahorse is in Greek is hippocampus or hippocamp, and this is a part of the brain that is very complex processing center for memory and time and mapping and social mapping and all sorts of things. And so looking at the museum as a kind of repository of memory and false memory often, and tying it into this Greek mythology, and Penelope is also part of a Greek, the Greek myth of Penelope would weave. She was waiting for Odysseus to return. Odysseus was off in various wars, including the Trojan War, and she would, according to legend, weave all day and unravel her weavings all night to buy time to sort of fend off the suitors. They were trying to marry her off, thinking that Odysseus was dead. So she would, with this strategy of sort of weaving and then unweaving, I thought was kind of an interesting sort of connection. And then I made these bronze seahorses that go into the cabinet with the actual, they let me play with their collection. So there's some beautiful things in their collection, like this funerary urn, which has a scylla, which is like a kind of sea monster or a siren on it. And then the Starbucks cups that also have a scylla on it, and then the seahorses animations. And that is that. That's a massive run through just some work. So I hope it wasn't too confusing.
A wonderful little ecosystem. We want to open it for questions for everybody in the space. You can raise your hand, or you can use the raise hand feature, or if you've updated Zoom and you raise your hand, it might automatically do the little icon. I wanted to just start off by asking Mikala, you have over 40 years of experience working as a site responsive interdisciplinary artist. And I know many of the artists here and at TAS are artists of a similar vein. And I was just wondering, over those 40 years, if you went back to an earlier version of yourself, what would be some kind of advice or thoughts that you would love your earlier self to have heard or received? Or maybe this was something you heard and received and really helped you along your prolific career.
Oh, there's been many advice, maybe not heeded at the time. That people, yeah. I think one thing would be take care of yourself. don't sacrifice yourself at the expense of sometimes that manic energy to make work is really all-consuming, and you can really do your health a terrible disservice sometimes. I've been really sick from things, and looking back, I think I wished I'd sort of been a bit more looking after myself more in a way. One thing, but other things, I think, and in other ways, I think there's 40 years. It's a long time. just to have the courage to be yourself and to just not give a fuck about what other people think sometimes, especially, you know, institutions and galleries and gallerists in particular, but never to always thread yourself back to the work and ground yourself in the work and know that art is so great because it's, you know, however many humans on the planet, 7 billion, whatever brains, not one of them is alike. Every neural pathway, every neural architecture is different. And that's what makes art so interesting, is that everyone is different, so that it's no use comparing yourself. You've got to kind of fill up your practice with a kind of a trust in your own weirdness and kind of whatever that is, just, you know, go with it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mikala. Paulina, I see your hand up.
Hi, Mikala, and everybody. I'm Paulina. I'm
Paulina.
from Guatemala. I'm a former TAS student, and I'm very intrigued of your work. You touched actually what I was intrigued about, because it feels you put 200% of your body in each piece,
Yeah.
and the level of experimentation with the materials and putting up, which you enjoy installing your pieces, which are massive pieces. I was so curious about the process. How does the process come across? How does this impact? I know your body, yeah, usually when you put a lot of energy, your body absorbs, you know, the weirdness that you're putting into it, and you get sick.
Yeah.
But I would guess that your processes are very rich, because the end result is very rich.
Oh, that's nice.
And it just calls people to experiment in the same way that you experiment with your body and the materials that you use, and especially with the concept of void, which is central to your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Showing the void in a beautiful way, in a way that calls you to move your body inside your installations. I mean, it was just an image, and I just felt like going in there and dancing or chanting or doing something with my body. So I was curious about that, your body in relationship to your work process.
Yeah, it's key, and that's the most lovely feedback. Thank you. It's yeah, you made my day. I think the body, it really, particularly with the big plastic works, I realized that I'm really literally wrestling my body against the void, or with the void, or in the void. Like I'm trying to define this space, and I'm wrestling this horrible material, but it gets really physical and it's exhausting. But then I come to a point where sort of a shape starts to emerge, and I can't stop, and I want to keep going. And yeah, and then I think they're all really physical works, because I think I want to, you know, I think like most of us, you want to change the world. So you start with your own world. You just change what, you know, so it is about a kind of a physical kind of transformation and metamorphosis with the stuff of your world, very ordinary things. And the process is really just beginning with, you know, very simple, sometimes they're just personal, day-to-day, ordinary things, but then they gather a kind of an energy. Some things gather more energy than others, and it's I guess it's trying to harness certain feelings or emotions or energy, or in relation to wherever you are, whoever you're with, whatever's happening in the world at the time, and trying to kind of negotiate all those things into something that you can inhabit somehow, to see it or something, I don't know. or feel it or something. I don't know if that explains it. Maybe not, but
No, it does. It does, because just by an image, you can feel it.
I think there's a lot of not knowing and trying to, and the void is sort of like something, I guess it's like not knowing or knowing, or not wanting to like preserve that space as well of not entirely knowing, so that there's something that drives you on. Is
Yeah, because you're not feeling the void in the sense of putting things into it just to cover it. You're actually making it obvious, so something can flow out of it. I guess that the circle has something to do with that also.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a frame, they're all frameworks, I guess, or they trying to, like, I think we always fill up a void. Like, it's very hard to really imagine an empty space because we project into it. So I try to kind of create a space that anyone can project. Like, but I feel like the void is, it's like it's an existential thing we all face. That,
Of course.
and I think we spend a lot of time just in decorating it, the edges of it. Yeah. I guess that's what the circle works are. They're decorating the void.
I think it also has a ritualistic sense to it, being in a circle.
Mm.
I mean, usually all ancestral ceremonies, I come from a country that has 23 ethnic groups.
Yeah.
So all the ceremonies that are circle, the people sit in a circle, they have a circle with the 12 nahuales, and the circle is very important also in relationship to the void. If you go to, I'm a psychoanalyst, so if you go to Lacan,
right.
yes, and then you see, the Taurus and the Moebius band and the Klein bottle, it all relates to the void. Even a black hole needs a void.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable, the void, but it makes you create.
Yeah, it's something to honor for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Wonderful.
Any other questions for Mikala?
I'll hop in. I think that was really beautiful. I'm not even sure I want to ask the question I was noodling on before we got talking about the void and sacred geometry, and that was really beautiful to be a part of. But I will ask you, Mikala, I was really impacted by the site-specific installations that you created and continue to create in your practice. So in terms of going to a place like Cockatoo Island, is there a particular set of questions that you ask yourself in order to direct the creation that you make for that site? Is there a specific scientific method that you keep as an internal practice, or is it, I go there, I feel something, and I follow that energy? Could you speak more about that process?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think particularly with Cockatoo Island, I was really lucky. I had a 6-month residency there prior to that work, and because I also knew the site, I spent quite a lot of time just working there in this big empty shed, and it is about a kind of deep listening to it, but it's also I am really interested in science, and I am really inspired a lot by science, but it's very, potted science. And my father was an industrial chemist, so I kind of grew up around his lab and, horrible materials that he worked with, but I have a great affection for horrible materials. But so through that, it's kind of like, but also I'm really interested in sort of paranormal investigations. There was actually a paranormal film crew there when I was working there, and they had all the, the heat-seeking gear and all that stuff. And they actually interviewed me on that. I actually did see ghosts. So it isn't necessarily science, but there is a process where I'm trying to kind of quite systematically drum up ghosts. And it's, I don't know. But it's a process of just being with a place and trying to connect. And understand it on many different levels, I guess.
Bringing almost scientific methods to the mystical and unexplainable,
Yeah.
opening the void.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mikala, for your lovely talk, and thank you for these thoughtful, deep questions. We've got one that popped up, a comment that popped up in the chat. So thank you all for coming out today. And
thank you so much for having me back, and thank you for the wonderful questions. I really enjoyed it.
great to have you, Mikala. I'm sure we'll see you again very soon.
Artists around the world, teaching artists around the world.